The quantum stabilizer was dying, and with it, the lives of everyone aboard Horizon Station. Dr. Elena Rodriguez's breath fogged the inside of her helmet as she maneuvered through the station's catastrophically failing infrastructure. Sparks erupted from fractured conduits, and the station's massive quantum resonance chamber pulsed with an angry, unstable rhythm that threatened to tear apart the very fabric of space around them. 6 different alien species watched from the command center, their most brilliant engineers reduced to helpless spectators. The Voxnar representative, a crystalline being whose translucent body refracted the emergency lighting, transmitted its despair across the communication channels. The quantum stabilizer was more than just a piece of technology. It was the linchpin holding together an entire sector of interstellar space. Elena's team was dead. Rodriguez and her 2 assistants, brilliant xenotechnical engineers who had spent years studying this specific stabilizer, had been caught in the initial quantum cascade. Now she was alone, her oxygen reserves dwindling, with less than 30 minutes to prevent a catastrophic spatial collapse. "Command, I need complete access to the primary quantum matrix," she transmitted, her voice steady despite the situation. The alien engineers hesitated. No human had ever been granted full system access to such a critical piece of galactic infrastructure. "Dr. Rodriguez, the risk is," the Krellak's chief engineer began. "Is death," she interrupted. "And not just our death. We're looking at the potential destruction of 17 star systems if this stabilizer fails completely." The silence that followed was profound. Then, something unexpected happened. Elena began removing her environmental suit's advanced sensor array. The alien observers watched in horrified fascination as she started connecting her own bioelectric systems directly to the quantum matrix interface. Her background wasn't just in quantum engineering. Elena Rodriguez was a product of humanity's most advanced adaptive engineering programs, a discipline that viewed technological problems as living, breathing challenges to be understood, not simply solved. The quantum stabilizer was failing because its designers had fundamentally misunderstood quantum entanglement. They had created a system so rigidly perfect that it couldn't adapt to the dynamic nature of quantum fluctuations. Humans, by contrast, understood imperfection as a feature, not a flaw. As her body became the conduit, Elena felt something no alien engineer could comprehend. It wasn't just about mathematical precision. It was about understanding the system's soul, its fundamental nature. Her neural implants began to overheat. Warning systems screamed. But Elena was beyond warnings now. She was experiencing the quantum stabilizer's entire operational history. Every fluctuation, every moment of stress, every near failure, compressed into milliseconds. The station's alien crew watched in stunned silence. Elena's body glowed with an impossible energy, her human physiology serving as a bridge between technological failure and miraculous restoration. 17 minutes passed, then 20, then 25. At the 28-minute mark, the quantum stabilizer's chaotic energy suddenly snapped into perfect, harmonious resonance. Elena collapsed. When she regained consciousness in the medical bay, the alien engineers approached her with something beyond respect. It was a mixture of awe and fundamental recognition. She had done what their most advanced computational systems and millennia of collective knowledge could not. "How?" asked the Voxnar chief engineer, its crystalline form pulsing with confusion and wonder. Elena smiled weakly. "Sometimes you have to break the rules to save the system." The quantum stabilizer wasn't just repaired, it had been transformed. Subsequent analysis would show that Elena's intervention had not only prevented catastrophic failure, but had actually improved the system's efficiency by 273%. More importantly, she had demonstrated something profound about human engineering. It was less about perfect design and more about adaptive problem-solving. Where alien engineers saw immutable systems, humans saw living, breathing challenges waiting to be understood. As news of her miraculous repair spread across the Galactic Confederation, Elena Rodriguez became more than just an engineer. She became a symbol of humanity's unique approach to technological challenges, unpredictable, intuitive, and utterly brilliant. The void of space had met its match, and it would never be the same again. The Krellak's High Council chamber vibrated with an eerie, crystalline resonance of pure desperation. Billions of living crystal entities, each a fragment of a collective consciousness, hung in delicate quantum suspension, their entire civilization balanced on the razor's edge of extinction. Marcus Chen stood before them, disheveled and unintimidated. His eyes betrayed no hint of the enormous pressure weighing upon him. 72 hours. That was all the time he had been given to solve an impossible problem. How to transport an entire civilization without shattering their quantum coherence. The chamber's walls pulsed with complex light patterns, the Krellak's primary method of communication. Each pulse translated to words of mounting anxiety. Their home system's star was collapsing, its death throes threatening to annihilate everything they were. Your previous attempts have failed, Marcus stated flatly. Every transportation method proposed by your best engineers would essentially kill your civilization. You're not just moving bodies. You're moving a collective consciousness that exists in a state more complex than any biological or mechanical system we've encountered. A senior Krellak's elder, its crystalline form shifting between translucent blues and urgent crimsons, projected a holographic representation of their failed transportation attempts. 17 different approaches, each ending in quantum catastrophe. Marcus remembered his grandmother's orchid collection. During Hurricane Maria, she had developed an intricate preservation method that saved her rare botanical specimens. She taught him that survival was about understanding the fundamental nature of something, not forcing it to conform to external conditions. His quarters looked like a madman's sanctuary. Holographic projections covered every surface. Quantum mechanics textbooks lay scattered alongside botanical preservation journals, botanical genetic research papers, and ancient human agricultural texts. Notes were scribbled in 3 different languages, mathematical equations bleeding into botanical diagrams. The breakthrough came at 3:47 a.m., after 70 consecutive hours without sleep. Marcus realized the Krellaks weren't just a civilization. They were a living, breathing quantum ecosystem. Their transportation couldn't be mechanical. It needed to be organic, adaptive, responsive. He developed a quantum suspension matrix that didn't just move the Krellaks, it breathed with them. Drawing from principles of plant preservation, quantum mechanics, and adaptive biological systems, Marcus created a transportation method that treated the entire civilization as a single living organism. The first test was heart-stopping. A small sample of Krellak's crystals, representing approximately 10,000 individual consciousness fragments, would be the first to attempt the transit. The Galactic Confederation's most advanced scientists watched. Alien species from across the galaxy held their collective breath. Marcus's hands moved with a dancer's grace across the quantum interface. He wasn't just inputting coordinates, he was composing a living symphony of quantum preservation. The crystals began to shift. Not teleport, not transport, but flow. Like water changing states, like plants adapting to new environments, the Krellaks moved through space while maintaining perfect quantum coherence. When the transit completed, the sample group was not just intact. They were enhanced. Their quantum state had actually stabilized during the transition, something deemed impossible by every previous scientific model. The Krellak's High Council fell into a stunned silence. Their communication patterns shifted from anxious reds and blues to a harmonious iridescent green, a color that, in their language, represented pure wonder and gratitude. "How?" asked the elder, its crystalline form pulsing with an emotion that transcended words. Marcus smiled, exhaustion and triumph mixing in his expression. "By treating you not as a problem to be solved, but as a living system to be understood." Over the next 48 hours, the entire Krellak civilization, billions of crystalline consciousness fragments, would be transported using Marcus's method. Not a single quantum connection was lost. Not a single consciousness fragment destabilized. When the final transit completed, the Galactic Confederation realized something profound. Humans didn't just solve problems. They reimagined what was possible. Marcus Chen became more than an engineer that day. He became a symbol of humanity's most remarkable trait, the ability to see connections where others saw only chaos. The refugee fleet was saved, and the universe would never look at human ingenuity the same way again. Dr. Aisha Nakamura's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the final calibrations on the quantum communication array. Behind her, a pantheon of alien scientific observers watched with a mixture of hope and skepticism that bordered on open contempt. 12 years earlier, Aisha had lost her wife, Commander Elena Martinez, during a deep space exploration mission. A miscommunication, a delayed signal, a moment of missed connection. These had conspired to create an unimaginable personal tragedy. Where others might have been crushed by grief, Aisha had transformed her pain into purpose. The Galactic Communication Consortium had spent millennia attempting to solve the fundamental problem of instantaneous, perfect interstellar communication. Quantum entanglement had always seemed promising, but previous attempts resulted in nothing more than fragmentary, unreliable transmissions. What made Aisha's approach different was her radical interdisciplinary perspective. She wasn't just a quantum physicist. She was also a cognitive psychologist, a neural network specialist, and, most importantly, someone who understood communication as more than just an exchange of information. The test chamber hummed with an otherworldly energy. Quantum entanglement generators surrounded her, each one a marvel of engineering that represented centuries of collective scientific achievement. But Aisha knew that true breakthrough came not from perfection, but from understanding imperfection. Her methodology combined quantum mechanics with human cognitive science in a way no alien civilization had ever conceived. She didn't just want to transmit data. She wanted to transmit experience. The first test involved sending a complex emotional and informational payload across a distance of 3.2 million light-years. Traditional communication would have taken millennia. Quantum communication promised instantaneous transmission. But Aisha's approach promised something more: comprehensive understanding. The Vrelnak's lead scientist, a gaseous entity that communicated through complex electromagnetic patterns, projected its skepticism across the chamber. Dr. Nakamura, the mathematical models suggest a 99.987% probability of failure. Aisha didn't even look up. Probability is just another word for imagination waiting to be expanded. Her neural implants began to interface directly with the quantum communication array. But this wasn't just a technological connection. It was a deeply personal, almost spiritual interface that merged human consciousness with quantum mechanics. The moment of transmission was breathtaking. It wasn't just data that traveled across those millions of light-years. It was a complete, multidimensional experience. The receiving station would not just get information about a moment. They would live that moment. Every sensory detail, every emotional nuance, every microscopic environmental fluctuation would be transmitted with perfect, devastating clarity. The alien scientists watched in stunned silence. When the transmission completed, something unprecedented happened. The receiving station, staffed by a species that had never before experienced true empathetic communication, suddenly understood in a way that transcended language, technology, or even individual perception. Aisha collapsed, her neural systems momentarily overwhelmed by the quantum transmission. But her final, fleeting thought was of Elena, her lost love, whose memory had driven this impossible breakthrough. The Galactic Communication Consortium would later describe it as the most significant technological achievement in recorded history. But for Aisha, it was something more personal. It was a bridge, not just between stars, but between hearts. She had transformed her greatest personal loss into humanity's most remarkable scientific achievement. The void of space had always been silent, but now it would speak with a human voice, complex, passionate, and utterly unstoppable. The Vortex generation ship loomed like a dead titan against the infinite blackness of space. 10,000 years of silence had transformed the massive vessel into something between a tomb and a time capsule. Jack Rodriguez stood at the observation port, his reflection ghosting over the ship's massive, scarred hull. 17 different alien species had declared the ship unsalvageable. Its systems were so complex, so degraded, that any attempt at restoration would likely result in complete annihilation of whatever remnants of information and culture remained. But Jack Rodriguez wasn't just an engineer. He was an archaeotechnological reconstruct specialist, a uniquely human discipline that viewed technological artifacts as living historical narratives waiting to be understood. His team represented the most diverse group ever assembled for a deep space recovery mission. 3 alien species worked alongside humans, each bringing unique perspectives. But Jack knew the key to success would be something quintessentially human, an almost rebellious refusal to accept impossible limitations. The ship's outer hull told a story of epic proportions. Micrometeorite impacts, quantum radiation scaring, and evidence of multiple near-catastrophic system failures painted a picture of a civilization that had pushed technological boundaries to their absolute limits. Traditional recovery protocols would involve careful, incremental data extraction. Jack's approach was different. He saw the generation ship not as a piece of technology, but as a living organism with a story waiting to be heard. His first breakthrough came from an unlikely source. While other team members focused on computational reconstruction, Jack began by understanding the ship's emotional infrastructure. How did its original designers conceive of long-term survival? What cultural narratives were embedded in its most basic systems? Using a combination of quantum archaeology techniques, adaptive neural reconstruction algorithms, and what could only be described as technological intuition, Jack began to map the ship's fundamental consciousness. The moment of breakthrough was nothing short of miraculous. As his team's systems interfaced with the ship's long-dormant infrastructure, something unexpected happened. It wasn't just data that emerged, it was a narrative. The ship began to tell its own story, layer by layer, system by system. The Vortex hadn't just been a civilization. They had been storytellers, philosophers, dreamers who had encoded their entire cultural essence into the very fabric of their generation ship. Each system was a chapter, each quantum fluctuation a paragraph in an epic that had been waiting 10,000 years to be read. Jack's neural interface began to glow with an impossible light. The ship was communicating, not just through data, but through a form of technological empathy that transcended traditional communication methods. Piece by piece, the impossible became possible. Systems that had been dead for millennia began to pulse with renewed energy. The ship wasn't just being restored, it was being reborn. When the final reconstruction completed, the Galactic Archaeological Consortium was stunned. Not only had Jack Rodriguez recovered a dead generation ship, but he had also preserved an entire civilization's cultural and technological legacy. The Vortex ship became more than a technological marvel. It became a testament to humanity's unique approach to problem-solving. Where others saw a dead artifact, humans saw a living story waiting to be understood. Jack Rodriguez stood at the ship's newly reconstructed bridge, surrounded by holographic representations of a civilization long thought lost. His Aunt Alina's words echoed in his mind. Technology is just another form of storytelling. The void of space had kept its secrets for 10,000 years, but human ingenuity had finally learned to listen. Catastrophe approached with the indifferent precision of astronomical mathematics. 3 star systems stood on the precipice of total annihilation. Conventional evacuation protocols had already failed spectacularly. The Galactic Emergency Response Coalition had exhausted every standard approach, their most advanced computational systems predicting a survival rate of less than 2%. Enter Maria Gonzalez and her human emergency response team. Where other species saw an insurmountable disaster, Gonzalez saw a complex, dynamic problem waiting to be reimagined. Her team wasn't just composed of engineers and emergency specialists. They were systems thinkers, cognitive adaptability experts, and individuals who understood that survival was more about flexibility than rigid planning. The approaching stellar event wasn't just a physical phenomenon. It was a systemic challenge that required a holistic, almost organic response. Gonzalez's first radical decision came within minutes of receiving the initial threat assessment. While alien emergency coordinators were still developing multi-stage evacuation algorithms, she implemented what her team called living response protocols, an approach that treated the entire evacuation as a single adaptive organism. Traditional evacuation methods focused on fixed routes, predetermined safe zones, and linear thinking. Gonzalez's method was fundamentally different. Her systems could predict, adapt, and redirect in milliseconds, treating each evacuee not as a data point, but as a dynamic, interconnected element of a larger survival strategy. Her neural interface glowed with an impossible complexity as she integrated multiple layers of predictive modeling. Population movement patterns, geological stability, resource allocation, psychological stress factors, all became part of a single, breathing computational ecosystem. The alien observers watched in stunned disbelief. As the first stellar perturbations began, most emergency response systems would have locked into predetermined protocols. Gonzalez's system did something unprecedented. It learned and adapted in real time. Evacuation routes shifted dynamically. Resource allocation became fluid. Communication networks reorganized themselves instantaneously. Where traditional systems would have collapsed under the complexity, the human approach thrived. 36 hours into the crisis, something remarkable happened. Not only were evacuation rates increasing exponentially, but the surviving populations were experiencing minimal psychological trauma. The evacuation wasn't just a movement of bodies. It was a carefully orchestrated preservation of entire cultural ecosystems. When the final stellar event reached its peak, 98.3% of the populations across 3 star systems had been successfully evacuated and relocated. Compared to the initial 2% survival prediction, it was nothing short of a miracle. But for Maria Gonzalez, it wasn't a miracle. It was simply what happened when you stopped seeing challenges as fixed problems and started understanding them as living, breathing systems. The Galactic Emergency Response Coalition would spend decades studying her methods. Academic papers would be written, computational models would be developed, but they would never fully capture the essence of what made the human approach so unique. It wasn't about having the most advanced technology. It was about having the most adaptive perspective. As the dust settled and millions of lives were saved, Maria Gonzalez stood in the command center, her team around her. They weren't celebrating. They were already thinking about the next challenge, the next system waiting to be understood. The void of space had thrown its worst challenge yet. Humanity had not just survived. They had transformed the very concept of survival. Dr. Hiroshi Tanaka understood what no other engineer in the galaxy seemed to comprehend. Technology was not about creating perfect systems, but about creating living, breathing interfaces between biological and mechanical worlds. The Zinthar delegation arrived looking defeated, silicon-based beings with a fundamental physiological structure so different from organic life that previous biomechanical integration attempts had resulted in nothing but catastrophic failures. 17 distinct civilizations had tried. 17 had failed spectacularly. Tanaka's laboratory looked like a beautiful chaos. Traditional Japanese craftsmanship tools hung alongside quantum interface modules. Botanical specimens grew alongside mechanical prototypes. Ancient texts on ecological systems sat next to cutting-edge neural network designs. His approach wasn't just interdisciplinary. It was a complete reimagining of what integration could mean. The Zinthar representatives, beings composed of intricate silicon lattices that barely resembled traditional life forms, projected their collective skepticism. Their communication was a complex dance of electromagnetic pulses that translated to something between despair and scientific exhaustion. "We have tried," their lead engineer transmitted, 17,342 distinct approaches. Each has failed. Hiroshi smiled. Failure, to him, was just another word for unexplored potential. The breakthrough came from an unlikely combination of disciplines. Traditional Japanese woodworking techniques, quantum neural networking, adaptive ecological systems theory, and a profound understanding of how living systems communicate and evolve. Where previous attempts had tried to force mechanical systems onto biological structures, Tanaka developed an adaptive interface that grew with the host system. It wasn't integration, it was symbiosis. His first prototype looked nothing like a traditional biomechanical system. It was more like a living, breathing ecosystem, a complex network that could adapt, heal, and transform in real time. The mechanical and biological components didn't just communicate. They collaborated. The test was heart-stopping. A small Zinthar research subject, its silicon-based physiology previously considered incompatible with any mechanical integration, was prepared. The alien scientists watched with a mixture of hope and deep, historical skepticism. As Tanaka's adaptive interface began to interface with the Zinthar's fundamental structure, something unprecedented happened. The mechanical components didn't just attach to the biological system. They became part of it. Neural pathways formed. Quantum communication channels opened. The mechanical and biological systems began to breathe together, to think together, to exist together in a way that transcended traditional understanding of integration. The Zinthar research subject didn't just survive the integration. It thrived. When the final results were analyzed, the scientific implications were staggering. This wasn't just a technological breakthrough. It was a fundamental reimagining of what life, technology, and integration could mean. Hiroshi Tanaka had done more than solve a technological challenge. He had created a philosophy of existence that challenged fundamental assumptions about biological and mechanical systems. The Galactic Scientific Consortium would spend decades studying his work. Countless papers would be written. Entire academic disciplines would be transformed. But for Tanaka, it was simply another day of understanding that the most profound technologies emerge not from rigid thinking, but from a willingness to see connections where others saw only barriers. The void of space had presented its challenge. Humanity had responded with something more powerful than technology. They had responded with imagination. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood before the Galactic Science Council, about to shatter everything they believed about the fundamental laws of the universe. Entropy, the inexorable march of disorder, had been considered an immutable cosmic law for millennia. Every civilization in the galaxy understood it as an absolute. Time moves in one direction, disorder increases, and the universe inevitably decays. Humanity was about to prove them wrong. The research facility was a marvel of impossible engineering. Quantum stabilization chambers surrounded a central experimental zone that seemed to defy the very laws of physics. Elena's team represented the most radical thinkers humanity had ever produced, individuals who saw scientific limitations as nothing more than temporary obstacles. Her personal history was etched into every component of the experiment. The daughter of immigrants, raised on stories of resilience and transformation, Elena had always understood that the universe was more flexible than anyone believed. The alien scientific observers represented 7 different species, each with millennia of scientific tradition watching her work. Their collective skepticism was palpable, transmitted through complex electromagnetic and quantum communication channels. Impossible, the Vrelnak's chief scientist transmitted. Its gaseous form rippled with scientific contempt. The laws of thermodynamics are fundamental. Entropy cannot be locally reversed. Elena's smile was both a challenge and a promise. The experimental apparatus looked like a beautiful fusion of art and science. Quantum entanglement generators intertwined with neural network interfaces. Biological computing systems merged with pure mathematical models. Traditional scientific instrumentation stood alongside components that looked more like abstract sculptures. Her methodology wasn't just about reversing entropy. It was about understanding entropy as a dynamic negotiable system rather than an immutable law. The first test would create a localized field where time could momentarily flow backward, not through traditional time manipulation, but through a fundamental restructuring of quantum informational states. As the experiment began, the very fabric of scientific understanding began to tremble. Quantum markers began to shift. Disorder began to reorganize. Within a carefully controlled experimental zone, broken systems began to heal. Degraded components began to reconstruct. Time itself seemed to become a malleable substance. The alien scientists watched in stunned, horrified fascination. For approximately 3.7 seconds, local entropy was not just paused, it was reversed. Systems that had been breaking down began to repair themselves. Information that had been lost began to reconstruct. The fundamental arrow of time became a suggestion rather than a law. When the experiment concluded, the scientific implications were staggering. This wasn't just a technological breakthrough. It was a fundamental challenge to everything known about universal physics. Elena Rodriguez had done more than conduct an experiment. She had opened a window into a universe far more complex and flexible than anyone had imagined. The Galactic Science Council would spend decades analyzing the results. Entire scientific disciplines would be rewritten. The fundamental understanding of time, entropy, and universal laws would be challenged. But for Elena, it was simply another day of proving that human imagination was the most powerful force in the universe. The void of space had presented its ultimate challenge. Humanity had responded by rewriting the very rules of existence. The Galactic Confederation hung in a moment of existential crisis. 17 different star systems faced simultaneous, catastrophic threats that defied every conventional solution. Quantum instabilities, stellar collapses, interdimensional breaches, civilizational extinction events, each challenge more impossible than the last. And there was only one group the entire galaxy now trusted to solve these problems. Humans. Dr. Elena Rodriguez looked out over the Emergency Coordination Center. Her team represented the most diverse, most adaptable group of problem solvers in known galactic history. Engineers, quantum physicists, cultural analysts, psychological adaptation specialists, each bringing a unique perspective that transcended traditional scientific boundaries. The alien representatives watched with a mixture of hope and profound respect. These were the same species they had, mere decades earlier, considered technological infants. Now, they were the last hope for entire civilizations. What made humans unique wasn't their technology. It was their perspective. Where other civilizations saw immutable laws, humans saw flexible suggestions. Where others saw impossible challenges, humans saw unexplored opportunities. Their approach wasn't about having the most advanced tools, but about having the most adaptive mindset. Marcus Chen was coordinating the stellar collapse interventions. His quantum stabilization techniques, developed during the Krell-X refugee mission, were now being applied to save entire star systems. Aisha Nakamura's quantum communication breakthrough allowed for unprecedented coordination across impossible distances. Jack Rodriguez's archaeological reconstruction technologies were being used to preserve civilizational memories, even as entire planetary systems faced destruction. The solution wasn't about a single technological marvel. It was about a holistic, interconnected approach that saw challenges as living, breathing systems waiting to be understood. Hiroshi Tanaka's biomechanical integration techniques allowed for unprecedented adaptive responses. Maria Gonzalez's emergency management protocols transformed how entire populations could be preserved and relocated. As the final interventions began, something profound happened. The humans weren't just solving problems. They were reimagining what was possible. Entire star systems that should have been destroyed were stabilized. Civilizations that were moments from extinction were not just saved, but transformed. The very nature of survival was being rewritten. The Galactic Confederation realized something fundamental. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't in their technology. It was in their ability to see connections where others saw only chaos. Their willingness to challenge fundamental assumptions. Their profound understanding that every challenge was an opportunity for growth. When the final interventions completed, something unprecedented happened. The alien civilizations didn't just express gratitude. They expressed trust. Humans were no longer seen as a young, developing species. They were recognized as the most important adaptive force in the known universe. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood at the center of it all, watching as civilizations that should have been destroyed were now thriving. Her team, her family, had done more than solve problems. They had transformed the very concept of survival. The void of space had presented its ultimate challenge. Humanity had responded by rewriting the very rules of existence, and they were just getting started.